I love so many things about North Dakota, and one of the things I love the best is how anxious we are to help one another. You see it all the time. You've seen the traffic jams at entryways when you're trying to go into a restaurant or a building as people stop to hold the doors open for one another. If you've ever stopped alongside one of our roads to take a picture or a phone call or to change a tire, you've probably had multiple people stop just to make sure you don't need any help. Another way North Dakotans can show kindness to their neighbors is by getting vaccinated. Vaccinations keep vulnerable people safe from severe illness and death. They keep our economy running by keeping our businesses open. They help us stay mentally healthy by allowing us to connect with others through church events or community groups. They also keep our healthcare workers safe and on the job. Getting vaccinated is a choice you can make to help your neighbors, your community, and your state. So talk to your doctor about it and follow their advice to get the vaccinations that will help keep you and all the people you care about healthy and happy. To learn more, go to spreadlovenotcovidnd.org, a website set up by the North Dakota State University Center for Immunization Research and Education.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and happy to be with you. Our legislature begins session today, which of course always calls to mind that old quote, often erroneously attributed to Mark Twain, about people's life, liberty, and property being in jeopardy when the legislature's in session. And that's an awful cynical take. But one of the new members in the legislature, I shouldn't say member of the legislature, but the executive branch is involved in the legislative process in a couple of ways. Every bill that gets passed has to go through the governor's office to get signed or vetoed. And also, the lieutenant governor presides over the state senate, and there's a new person in that role. Used to be Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford's been there for the last few sessions, and now there's a new lieutenant governor, Tammy Miller, former border state CEO, then was COO of in Governor Burgum's administration, and then when Lieutenant Governor Sanford moved on, she moved up to the lieutenant governor spot. And Tammy, first of all, congratulations. I'm sure it's probably exciting for you and a lot of new stuff. I remember talking to Drew Wrigley when he became lieutenant governor and all the work he put in to learning the arcane parliamentary procedures of overseeing the state senate. Have you been catching up? Have you been boning up on that stuff? I mean, that's people. I don't think people understand. That's kind of a big job.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rob, for having me. The last 2 weeks have been quite a whirlwind. As soon as the announcement was made, I went up to Ledge Council, met all the staff up there. They gave me the rule books, and I started my research. Also had meetings with the leaders. And then Brent and Drew have this great little 3-ring binder with all of the procedural steps. And then the last big resource is Joe Wolf, who sits up at the desk with me and helps point out the next steps in the process, as well as shares the agenda every day.
Lieutenant Governor Miller, congratulations on your appointment. I believe you are the now 3rd woman that's ever served as Lieutenant Governor in the state of North Dakota. I don't know what number of Lieutenant Governor you are. I am guessing there are a lot of folks. I'm from the Fargo area, living on the eastern side of the state myself, but I'm guessing there are a lot of folks around the state who, when they saw the announcement or read in the paper that Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford was retiring, or to be very honest, because it was announced the week right around Christmas, maybe they weren't paying quite as much attention to the news and haven't seen it. I'm just guessing, and it's no offense to you, that they might not know you all that well. Could you actually take a little bit of time and talk about your private sector career and where you're from so folks can get to know you a little bit better?
Oh, absolutely. Love to do that. I grew up around Brockett, North Dakota. The population there at the last census was 34, and that was a decline from the previous census of 57. So my parents operated family business, primarily lumber and hardware was what they were selling. So grew up in that environment, always worked really hard every day, understood good customer service from working in the family business, and also have giving back really deep in my DNA because of the experiences I had with my family. My grandparents lived in the same community, saw my grandparents every day, went to elementary school there in Brockett, had 6 in my class in elementary school. And then went to the big school of Lakota, 12 miles north of Brockett, and had just over 40 in my graduating class. Really had a great experience in small Class B high school because, as you know, there aren't a lot of students, so you have the opportunity to do everything. If it's basketball, track, cheerleading, drama class, play, band, etc. So that was really a great experience growing up, and again, continued to instill the really deep expectation that everyone gives back to support their community. After that, I went to Morehead State University at the time, now called MSUM. I have an undergraduate degree in accounting. And shortly after graduating from MSUM, I passed the CPA exam and started to work at what was then Charles Bailey, and had a career there for about 8.5 years, focusing primarily on audits. So that was really a great experience too. Saw a variety of businesses across the state, got a good understanding about how businesses operate, good understanding of accounting, tax, business law, etc. But after 8 years, decided that wasn't something I wanted to do the rest of my life. So went to work for one of my clients, Border States Electric. Border States was a small company at the time, more of a regional electrical distributor versus national, and started out as the accounting manager, quickly moved to become the controller, and then kind of worked through a number of chairs, ultimately ending up in the Southwest region, running the Southwest region, which was 6 branches in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and the country of Mexico. Did that for 3 years, and then came back to Fargo in 2006 to be the CEO. At that time, we were a $485 million sales organization. We had a really well-defined strategic plan that we put together and executed. And when I retired on March 31st of 2020, we were about a $2.5 billion sales organization operating in over 20 states with over 100 branch locations and still headquartered in the great state of North Dakota. And proud to say we have many successful branches in North Dakota. I shouldn't say we. Border States has many successful branches in North Dakota in Grand Forks, Fargo, Bismarck, Watford City, Minot, Dickinson, and Williston.
The last time, I think the first time you and I talked, Tammy, was circa 2018.
Yes.
And you were thinking about maybe running for the United States Senate at the time, and you ultimately decided wasn't the right time, or maybe wasn't the right race. But now, obviously you've gotten involved. You're in elected office now, even though appointed at this point rather than elected. So I guess my question is, first, what made you finally decide to make the leap into elected office? And should Governor Burgum run again in 2024, which I think he will, but I assume your answer to that is probably going to be no comment. But if he were to run again, would you run as his running mate for another term in office?
Well, Rob, this has been a very recent opportunity, and decision. This whole conversation started like 3 weeks ago, so this is all relatively new. Obviously, I have a lot to learn, and am really focusing right now on being the best possible lieutenant governor that I can be over the next 2 years.
All right.
Lieutenant Governor Miller, I wanted to know, two-parter. Had you, again, just because people, I know they're going to want to get to know you better, have you ever ran for a local office or served in a local office before? And then the second part is, well, actually, go ahead and answer that.
It's interesting because I sit back and I am just really grateful and amazed to be in this position without ever being in a campaign or being elected.
It's true, and it's a very that is I don't know, that's not true. I'm sorry, I was about to say I don't know if anyone's ever been in your position in that way before, but that's not true at all. Lloyd Amdahl was in your position under Governor Sinner when unfortunately Ruth Myers passed away in office. So we've had an appointment here in North Dakota before. I was going to ask, I was trying to look up and do some research on you, and I looked through some donor history. It looked like you were on the fairly conservative side most of your life. I did see there you made a few donations to folks like Amy Klobuchar over in Minnesota and all around, and I know you were very involved in border states electing those days. It sounds like an odd question, but again, folks are trying to get to know you. Do you consider yourself to have a political party? Because it's not, you're serving under Governor Burgum, who ran, was endorsed, and was elected as a Republican. Do you consider yourself to be a Republican? Do you consider yourself to be an independent? I'd imagine you would not consider yourself to be a Democrat, but I would like to hear from you, and I think people would like to hear from you what your political ideology falls under.
Absolutely. I definitely call myself a Republican. And I know there have been questions about the political contribution to Amy Klobuchar. And that's the easy explanation for me. As the CEO at Border States, I was running a 100% employee-owned company, employee-owned through an ESOP. Amy was very supportive of ESOPs. In fact, if you go back, you'll see that she did co-sponsor some ESOP legislation in 2013. So Border States at the time had operations in Minnesota, North Dakota, and many other states. And Amy was a firm supporter of ESOP, so that's why I did support Amy.
Sometimes the lieutenant governor, in fact, Ben brings up Lloyd Omdahl, and I'm always fond of a joke that Lloyd Omdahl made about lieutenant governors and why they don't look out the window in the morning. It's so that they have something to do in the afternoon. And I think the joke that he's allowed to make that joke because he's a former lieutenant governor. But I think what it's speaking to is that outside of presiding over the Senate, which is only about a 4-month job every 2 years, there's not a lot of defined roles for the lieutenant governor. I mean, there's some boards and stuff like that. Brent Sanford, really, I think a lot of times what the lieutenant governor does is really kind of up to the governor. Like, how does the governor want to use the lieutenant governor in the administration? Brent Sanford was very involved with the legislature. I heard a lot of lawmakers talk about how he was sort of a liaison between the executive branch, the governor's office, and the legislature. I know he was very involved on energy. Can you describe a little bit about what in your skill set that you can bring to, the governor's administration as lieutenant governor?
Absolutely. And a lot of those skills I have because I led a very large, successful corporation. And one of those skills is collaboration, bringing folks together to achieve more. And actually, that was a key part of my role as the chief operating officer. You probably didn't see me out in the hallways because I was working with the cabinet leaders, working with them to work across agencies to better serve the citizens of North Dakota. I think a lot of folks think that our state government is very siloed, and I worked very closely with cabinet agencies to break down those silos to deliver better service to the citizens of North Dakota. I do hope to bring that to this new role as well. Obviously, I was very focused on internal operations of the government. I am very excited to be out in my old role at Border States, would say out in the field, and here I'll say out in the state, to be meeting, networking, collaborating with the citizens as well as the legislators. I know I don't know a lot of the legislators, but it's a good time to be in this position because the leadership is almost all new, as well as almost 30% of the legislators. So many of us are learning as we go. I'm not a shy person, very curious and courageous too. So don't have any concern about getting to know the legislators and making a bigger impact in the state of North Dakota.
Well, I have to say there's so many new legislators this year that a lot of the legislators don't know the legislators. So everybody's getting to know each other.
And we have had a lot of opportunities to connect already in just these approximate 2 weeks. Had a number of meetings with the leaders. There have been a couple of socials and other events. So working very hard to get to know. Obviously, the first priority is the Senate because I'm working with them every day, but then also all of those leaders in the House as well and other members.
What, Lieutenant Governor Miller, would you say you think the main difference in either style or just the way you go about your role as Lieutenant Governor, you think would be the differences between you and your predecessor? And that's not to cast any kind of aspirations on Brett Sanford, but you have been in several executive positions, and you don't get there without having a few core fundamental principles that you run on. Those aren't always going to be the same as another person who served in that role. What do you think the main differences would be?
Well, and I don't know if we would necessarily call them or want to compare them to be differences, but my style is very collaborative, very transparent, work a lot. And if you look at my strengths, if any of you are familiar with Clifton Strengths Finders, I know we use that here with our cabinet leaders. Two of my strengths are achiever and maximizer. So I really like to bring people together to get things done and then to maximize results. And I think if you look at some of my track record at border states, as well as some of the things we've done over the last couple of years, you will see that those are my strengths.
You know what? One thing, Tammy, I thought was interesting, and somebody pointed this out to me, is that with you joining, Governor Burgum's ticket, as it were, we now have two Fargo CEOs on the ticket. And, I think when Governor my point of view from the outside looking in was that when Governor Burgum picked Brent Sanford, it was sort of intended to be almost like geographical diversity. Let's get somebody from the other side of the state, obviously a Western mayor, a lot of experience there. And also, I think criticism, as much as I have liked a lot of the things that Governor Burgum has done, I think one criticism sometimes is that he wants to run state government like it was a company. And the legislature, it's not a company. The legislature is not a division of North Dakota Incorporated. That's just not how it works. It's a fundamentally different animal. So can you speak to that? Maybe, I mean, you're both corporate people. You're both hugely successful, in your own spheres, and you've done a lot of work there. Do you have to find yourself, reminding yourself sometimes this isn't a corporation, this is politics now, this is state government now, and it's different?
Absolutely. And, the big difference is the profit motive. We don't do things in state government to generate a profit, but still we have to use common sense and make good decisions. And on the other hand, there are many ways that government can be more like business. I mentioned coming in, I was surprised at how siloed agencies operated and some of the duplication of effort that is out there that costs taxpayers money. And it also creates inconvenience and waste of time and resources for citizens to try to navigate that. So as we look at, unifying IT, unifying HR, unifying some of the communication for consistent messaging and branding, it's very corporate-like, but it makes good sense for state government as well. And it's more cost effective.
I will say that's one thing that I have liked is the focus on kind of user experience, right? Because I'm a citizen on the outside. I don't really care that, my fishing license and my driver's license and my motor vehicle renewal and my ability to log in and track bills at the legislature are all different, silos, to use your terminology, of state government. I just know I'm a citizen of North Dakota and I want to interact with my government in all those ways. So like having like one login to be able to do all those things, right? That's nice. I mean, that's
been something I've been working on for many, many months, and we hope to get funding in the legislature this session. We're calling it the business gateway, but it's part of the overall gateway for North Dakota. So the business gateway has been in discussion since 2005. And we really hope to get it done this session. So we've been working with 5 pilot agencies to put together a good strategy. So right now it's WSI, Job Service, Tax, Commerce, and NDIT, working on a way to have that one-stop shop for businesses. So they're interacting with the tax department, Secretary of State, Job Service. They have one sign-in and they can access all of state government regardless of what agency they're dealing with. We're starting kind of small, figuring that out with a group of pilot agencies. Hopefully we can quickly expand to include all state agencies, and it will be business and citizen focused. So like you said, if you're getting a park pass, if you're getting your driver's license renewed, if you're getting a title, if you're registering a business with the Secretary of State, one-stop shop and a really good experience, and available anytime.
Lieutenant Governor Miller, I know from my brief time in the legislature that there are so many national organizations and different groups and coalitions that states belong to, that caucuses belong to, that statewide elected officials belong to. In your case as a lieutenant governor, I'd say it's the most unique state level elected position in the country, because of course in the American Southeast, sometimes the lieutenant governor has more power over the legislature than the governor does. That's not, I wouldn't say it's quite the appropriate way to describe the system in North Dakota. Sometimes, especially in the South, they get elected on separate tickets than the governor, which as someone from up north, I found absolutely bizarre when I found out that was how they ran their elections. What I'm leading up to is, it's almost an unfair question because you've been on the job for a whopping 2 weeks, or sorry, for however long you have been. But what kind of behind the scenes or not out of state, but multi-state coalitions and organizations are you going to be part of that you don't think maybe the average North Dakota voter sees, just because they're not in your shoes, that you could maybe educate them on as your work as lieutenant governor? What would you like to accomplish with those roles outside of the legislature? I know you've got a multiple state, regional perspective coming from your private sector work. I think North Dakota voters would like to hear what you're trying to do as lieutenant governor in that arena.
So Ben, honestly, that hasn't been a focus at all on my first 3 days in the new role.
You had 72 hours. Come on, let's go.
I've really been focusing on, being prepared to lead the Senate, and then also getting up to speed for the many committees and councils and boards that I serve on. So that's been the focus, but I am aware of a couple of organizations that are out there for lieutenant governors, and we'll be digging into those. And right now, I think the greatest resource I have for my role is just the network of other states we already have from the governor's relationship. So we can call on those states and network and learn from them and their lieutenant governors.
I've always thought it interesting, the lieutenant governor's role in overseeing or presiding over the Senate. Because on one hand, you come from an administration that's got an agenda. There's things that obviously Governor Burgum just laid them out in his State of the State address and also his budget address. There are things that he'd like to see the legislature send to his desk. You represent that administration, but you're also tasked with overseeing what are sometimes some prickly, some heated debates over the Senate, and your role is kind of umpire, right? Calling balls and strikes. How do you balance those two roles of being, someone who's representative of an administration that obviously has certain outcomes in mind, and also, playing that umpire in the state Senate, calling balls and strikes? Yeah.
And Rob, I would say, there's certainly a lot of that conversation and even maybe some negotiation outside of the chambers. But when I'm presiding over the Senate, that's very well prescribed in the rules. So, the lieutenant governor can break a tie in the Senate, but if you look at history, that doesn't happen very often. So I don't expect that I will be in that position to influence a vote one way or the other from the Senate floor.
I'd imagine you'd have. Yeah, I was going to say, I would imagine, sorry to interrupt you, but I imagine you'd have one or two or maybe three opportunities all session, but given the partisan makeup of the Senate, I don't know if I would. I would like to ask, a bit more of a pointed question. I asked about the differences between you and your predecessor, and I'd like to hear kind of the, KPIs, if you will, or what the difference is going to be to the average North Dakota citizen from the beginning of this session to not maybe the end of the session, but the after effects of what the Burgum-Miller administration is hoping to achieve this session versus what would happen under another administration. Because very frankly, we've had a long string of, Republican, if you're looking at the partisanship factor of Republican governors and administrations for the past 20, maybe 30 now years. What is the difference that is made specifically that a Burgum-Miller administration would bring for this legislative session?
Well, I don't think there will be very many differences than what was happening with Burgum-Sanford. At the end of the day, Governor Burgum is still our governor. And the lieutenant supports the governor. The lieutenant governor supports the governor. And those strategic initiatives, the priorities for the governor, haven't changed in the last 3 weeks. They're the same. I mean, we had the budget address, we had the state of the state, and those initiatives, strategic initiatives and priorities have not changed for the governor. I may be supporting them in a different way because of my experience and my background, but the strategies and priorities have not changed. And one area I think that will be just a little different is the support for energy. Obviously, I very much support energy, had some good experience in Western North Dakota when I was with Border States, but don't have that deep understanding yet that Brent had. So that's an area that I will be working on.
You know, one thing that you were obviously chief operating officer for the administration before taking on this gig, and there was a lot of turnover in the administration. We've seen a lot of people come and go through there, and I always assume that part of that, from the outside looking in, I assume part of that is the same problem every employer in the state is facing, is that we have a worker shortage, and a lot of workers are leveraging that to find other opportunities and move up the ladder and get more pay. And a lot of times state government is just not as lucrative or not as advantageous in whatever way is important to the worker as private sector is. And so I guess, first of all, you were a very successful CEO. I got to imagine you took a pay cut to go to work for the state of North Dakota and to be lieutenant governor. So maybe, I mean, I realize that's a little bit personal, but again, I think as we look at some of the turnover rates, can you talk about that a little bit? Why so much turnover and what it's like to say, listen, I'm going to forego some of the opportunities that I could have in the private sector to serve in state government?
Yeah, absolutely. And Rob, for me, this was just a wonderful next chapter. I had a very well-defined retirement strategy at Border States and had laid out a succession plan and strategy to retire on March 31st of 2020. So I was just really grateful that this opportunity was available, first as chief operating officer and now as lieutenant governor, to do this in my next chapter and give back to the state of North Dakota. But to talk about especially the executive leadership with the cabinet, there has been turnover, but I think there always is turnover. We have amazing talent in the cabinet, and other folks like to poach that talent. We have lost good leaders to private industry, and as you mentioned, oftentimes it is difficult for the state to be competitive with salary.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear, I don't blame anybody. I mean, you got to do what's best for you and your family. If you have I'm not casting aspersions at anyone who makes that decision. Good for you.
But I think that's in part why we do have a pretty strong total rewards package in the governor's budget. We do know that our compensation is not market competitive. There is $90 million in for equity increases to bring base salary up. And then we do have some, higher than usual annual or biannual increases for team members as well. We are hoping to have support for that. And then we are also looking and supporting a change to the pension plan as well. I think many of us have seen that a pension plan that requires you to have basically your entire career with one organization isn't much of a recruiting tool anymore. We need to have more flexibility with the benefit plan for our team members, and we think a defined contribution plan would be more competitive and more portable for team members who are part of Team ND who might not plan to have a 20 or 30-year career with Team ND.
Where do you think that shift in culture and employment culture comes from? Starting with, from what I've seen, and it's very anecdotal on my end, you were a COO, so it's much more direct. Your observations were much more direct, but it appears as though folks who are serving in higher ranking appointed positions and within departments seem to be spending about 2 years within the Burgum administration, then usually moving into a private sector role. Whereas from what I saw the culture before, if you came in as a Jack Dalrymple person, chief of staff, what have you, you kind of tended to stay as a Jack Dalrymple person, and many of them were holdovers from the Hoban administration. And for instance, I mean, to put a fine point on it, I don't believe we've had a lieutenant governor resign midway through a term in North Dakota history, or if we have, it's been multiple decades. Can you speak to why you think where that shift in culture came from?
Well, I don't think that we have had a lot of cabinet leaders that have only served for 2 years. Recently, Joe Morissette announced his retirement. He has had a long career with Team ND and went through the first term with Governor Burgum. Brian Klipfel just retired. He has had his second career with Team ND. We had our CIO who left. He had been with Governor Burgum for 5 or 6 years. So we haven't had a lot of team members leave after 2 years from agency leadership roles. And I think most of the losses we've had recently have been for lucrative private opportunities or retirements.
Well, Tammy, you promised us 30 minutes. We got every second of that. So I really appreciate you coming on, and good luck presiding over those rowdies over in the Senate.
Thank you, Rob. And Ben, very excited about this new role as Lieutenant Governor. So grateful for the opportunity to serve the citizens of North Dakota. Thank you.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
Okay, just wrapped up our interview with Lieutenant Governor Tammy Miller, and a good interview, Ben. You know, I think obviously it's, she hasn't been on the job that long, but, Lieutenant Governor is an important role in the administration. I thought she answered some good questions there. It's always interesting when somebody new comes in. Like you said, this hasn't happened in a while where we've seen a lieutenant governor leave, partway through a term.
And I threw some pointed questions at her, and I wanted to, and I was really happy she was able to get a chance to give her bio, because I just think there's a lot of folks around the state, even, people who are pre-observant political watchers who just don't happen to know her. Nothing against her at all. She just hasn't been in elected office before. She has not served even in local office before.
No, that's important.
Nor does she need to, but people want to know who the lieutenant governor is. I threw a couple of duties outside of being immediately present in the session at her, and I'm glad she was just up front and said, "Hey, I've been on the job 3 days, man.
Yeah.
I'm not doing I haven't done that." And that's fair, but she's lieutenant governor, so she's going to get those questions.
I can't imagine. That. I mean, you look at the length and breadth of her success in the private sector. I don't think she's going to have any problems on the job, at least just in terms of competence. I don't think she's going to have any job problems, being lieutenant governor. And let's not forget, she has been serving in a role, more of a quiet role, more of a behind the scenes role in Burgum's administration for a while now. So I think that's interesting. I thought she handled the donation to Amy Klobuchar. We live in such hyper partisan times. We know that there's a faction of Republicans that don't think that Doug Burgum's a real Republican for whatever reason, for whatever, I guess, measure of a real Republican there is. So bringing up her donations to a prominent Democratic U.S. Senator, Amy Klobuchar, over in Minnesota, I thought was interesting. But I also thought her explanation was compelling. Listen, she was a businesswoman. And sometimes when you're in business, you make strategic political contributions. That's not a surprise.
Well, what I did find impressive there, though not surprised, is that she listed the specific issue that her employees at Boer States Electric support Amy Klobuchar over. And I would also add the more cynical, but I think correct viewpoint is, if you're a savvy business person doing business in multiple states and you have a lot of business in the state of Minnesota, you donate to Amy Klobuchar. If you're a business person doing a lot of business in the state of North Dakota, you donate to John Hoven. Those are forever incumbents who have been there for 3 terms each and won't go away until they decide they want to retire. it's a no-brainer. But, again, you're a lieutenant governor, you're going to get asked.
That's the reality. I mean, maybe you could say it's uncouth that you feel like you have to pay, financial homage to the political people. But look at in North Dakota, like the coal industry, the oil industry, people think of them as being quote unquote conservative industries. They made donations to Heidi Heitkamp. Maybe not in 2018, but they did.
I never saw the side by side with what oil and gas did with Heidi versus Kevin.
Well,
but it's a
6-year term. I mean, they were giving in some cycles where she wasn't necessarily on the ballot. In 2018, I think it was pretty lopsided when she was actually actively running. But in between, certainly, I mean, they greased the skids, and I like it or not, that's how our system works.
The one place I'd kick myself is I wish I had asked Lieutenant Governor Miller about what her main goals and plans are after the legislative session as Lieutenant Governor, because to give folks perspective, she spends most of her time not presiding over the Senate. No fault of hers as any Lieutenant Governor. You do it for 4 months every other year. Then you got 20 months, over a year and a half, where you were not presiding over the Senate and you were overseeing other boards like
investment board. Investment board.
Yeah. But you're also part of these other organizations. And I'd like to see, I feel like Governor Burgum has gotten much more involved in partisan organizations as a governor, going out to D.C., being part of the Republican Governors Association in a way that I don't think I saw Governors Dalrymple and Hoeven doing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm simply
they were involved. Well, they were members and they were certainly involved. I think it's a fair. My perception is your perception that Burgum is much more active on that front. I would have been interested, and obviously she wasn't gonna break any news with us today. I am interested in what her future political aspirations are. I asked her if she would be on the ticket with Burgum if he ran again. She didn't. She said she's just worried about the next 2 years.
Fast.
Yeah. So she's not going to give us anything there. But I don't know that someone like her moves into a spot like this, never having elected office before, if she wasn't thinking, gosh, I'd like to get elected on my own steam somewhere, sometime.
I think someone as sophisticated as her would not take a role for simply 2 years unless it was explicitly announced, I'm a placeholder. I'm keeping this seat warm, and I'm going to do the good job for 2 years to roll this one out. They haven't made that announcement, so I think a pretty easy tea leaves read is that she's at least on for a third Burgum term, if not something else after that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, and it's always interesting because there's so many Republicans who are wanting to move up the ladder, wanting to move up from the legislature to maybe a statewide elected office, or move from one statewide elected office to a more prominent one. There's just so many. And I got to tell you, I think Republicans are going to continue to be successful in this state when they continue to attract potential candidates like Tammy Miller, who, again, hugely successful, very competent person. Obviously, we're going to see how she does as lieutenant governor. But, as long as the NDGOP is attracting candidates like that, boy, that's pretty good.
Clearly a articulate, very successful in the private sector, very experienced person in multiple arenas, has done work outside of her time at Boer States Electric, and is not of the wing and of the make and model of peddling, conspiracy theories as a reason to run. And if she doesn't have experience with that, now she can preside over the legislature, so she'll get a lot of experience with it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, let's switch gears. Let's talk about the governor's state of the state. Laid out his plan to lawmakers. Not a lot of surprises there. He had the big announcement of Harold Hamm's $50 million donation to the Theodore Roosevelt Library. I think something we've talked about on this show is how important that project is to Burgum. I've had it told to me that Governor Burgum's going to run for a third term, in part because he wants to be in office when that project is completed.
I could see that, and I would love to know, and you'd have to do a professional poll, and no one's going to do it. I would love to know, east of Bismarck, if more than 5% of average voters, non-political junkies, even know the Teddy Roosevelt Library exists.
Oh, I think
I
they
really
do.
don't think they do.
I think 5%.
I disagree.
I think 5% is way too low. I don't know if it's a majority, but I think a lot of people know. It's going to be. You're talking about. So it was interesting when the Burgum people kind of tipped me off that the announcement was coming
Sure.
before before he announced it in the State of the State. And they did, a lot of people. You saw everybody dropping their stories as soon as he mentioned it in the speech. I was one of them, but I actually called Ed O'Keefe, who's the head of the Theodore Roosevelt Medora Foundation, the Theodore Roosevelt Library Foundation. The Medora Foundation's separate. That's the Ed Schaefer's. But the Library Foundation, he was telling me, he's kind of reticent because they don't want to announce big numbers because they want to keep people feeling like there's some urgency to donate to this project if they support it. But, he was telling me, listen, the Barack Obama Presidential Library raised about $900 million. He's thinking they're going to get about a third of that. The George W. Bush Presidential Library raised about $500 million. They're thinking about coming in $300 million for a president that died, was in office over a century ago, left office over a century ago.
Yeah.
So
has been out of the conversation for a while, and who frankly was not born here and was not ever a senator or representative.
Well, now you're going to use that to run it down. I think it's a great project, a $300 million project.
That's the difference between the two, though. Barack Obama was the senator from Chicago, from Chicago, senator from Illinois. George W. Bush was the governor of Texas. There was an inherent base there that was there's still people alive who were there who voted for them for governor or senator. No one's alive here who voted for him to represent them in Congress or in the governor's office. But
Teddy Roosevelt was a hugely consequential president. This facility is going to be a monument to that history, which our state is inextricably intertwined with. Teddy Roosevelt said to himself, he's not president, but for his time in North Dakota. I think it's fitting. I think it's a great project. I think it's going to be wonderful for tourism. It's going to bolster, what is already a wonderful attraction that is the town of Medora overall. I think it's a great project, and I think a lot of people in Western North Dakota are going to be happy about it.
And I don't know where Governor Burgum would have. It wouldn't have been appropriate for him to fit this into his speech. But I think the question needs to be asked of the, just to make sure everybody knows. They missed the announcement. Harold Hamm, the former CEO of Continental Resources. He's not currently, right?
He's chairman of the board. He's not CEO, but he's still chairman of the board, I believe.
Point being, came up, was very active, made his life and career with Continental Resources, which was a big player in horizontal drilling and thus became a big player in the North Dakota oil fields and was very aggressive in developing the Bakken during the 9 to 14 big boom we had, right? Still there. Harold Hamm was announced and was personally there. And he's a person that does like to show up in person for a lot of these things in North Dakota, and he's got a lot of credit for that. Has made an announcement that he'll be donating $50 million to the Theodore Roosevelt project out there, library project out there. I think it is, like I said, it wouldn't have been appropriate for the speech, but I think the question needs to be asked: will there be any opportunity for this to be retracted or reduced, a la the Walton pledge that happened 2 years ago? Because what was the original number and what did they pull back to?
I don't remember, but
a large amount.
But I do remember though that during his State of the State speech, and I guess we could get some clarification. But during the State of the State speech, Governor Burgum said that he had completed the donation. He specifically used the word
and that's
completed.
Different. Oh, that's different. That's totally different.
So to me that said the money's in. The money's been banked.
And if that's the case, that's worth, and I should look that up. I should research that too, because that is well worth asking, because there was a big announcement around the Walton, it was either one or multiple members of the Walton family who are the inheritors of the Walmart Sam's Club fortune and their foundation.
And then they reduced the gift.
Reduced it significantly by more than half.
But even so, there's still, when the legislature made a $50 million appropriation as an endowment for the ongoing maintenance and upkeep of and operating the museum, but it was contingent on $100 million in contributions. Even with the Walton family reducing their contribution, that $100 million threshold was met a while ago. And now, the foundation people, they're thinking they're going to come in and, ultimately around $300 million. That's triple, the commitment that they needed to trigger that endowment from the state. So I don't think there's any problem at all here with fundraising. Obviously they're going to want to get the most they can, but I don't think they're having problems.
I mean, it's fascinating that much capital is even being able to be spent on something that hadn't previously been, there pre this administration. I want to ask you more pointedly towards the session. Do you think the speech did what Governor Burgum wanted it to do as far as the true audience, the legislators there? Do you think it convinced them or moved the needle any? There are folks going in that already agree with him. There are folks going in that already disagree with him. Do you think he moved the needle with everybody? Specifically, did he influence the freshmen? I actually think no. And I think he might not even be able to, which is double cynical, but it also kind of relieves some of the responsibility.
I mean, it depends. It depends on which freshmen you're talking about, too. I mean,
that's true.
There's a lot of them, and they're not all the same. There's some younger ones.
Very true.
Ones that came in that are very much kind of a part of the Bastiat. I saw one of them, our previous guest, Brandon Pritchard. He was posting on there, and they all had a picture of Governor Burgum, and he posted that himself and some of the other young lawmakers and then Governor Burgum, and then posted the picture on there mocking the governor on Facebook. Sort of mocking the governor. This guy. Look who look who tried to get in on our picture or something like that. So I mean, yeah,
I had not seen that.
I mean. In a lot of ways, I think it kind of parallels with some of what's going on in Washington, D.C. In fact, I wrote a column about it this week where you look at some of that caucus of lawmakers, whether they're people who are just coming in as freshmen or people who are there. There's a caucus in the legislature that are kind of like this Freedom Caucus in Washington, D.C., where there's just no appeasing them. They're going to... their goal is not public service. Their goal is not meeting consensus. Their goal is culture war, performative politics for social media. And did Governor Burgum...
headlines and clicks.
Right. And did Governor Burgum win over those people? No. I would wonder, who could, but for, like a Rick Becker or something but that's only because, his agenda is the same, clicks and performance and everything else.
So I think that's actually interesting because I thought the speech was too long by about 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour. He was butting up on an hour 20. And the reason I say that is not to be a jerk, but the reason I say that is to speak to the effectiveness of it. I thought Governor Burgum gave his thesis statement towards the very end, which is, other people tell us we can't do things in the state of North Dakota. Sometimes we internalize that self-doubt. We need to get rid of that and shrug off the idea of cold weather is going to stop us or where we are is going to stop us, and seize on these opportunities and move into the future. And I worry, writing a speech is not easy. Delivering a state of the state is not simple. It's incredibly complex, and you're playing to 500 different segments of audience members, and you're trying to get off. And he called out key legislators. He's trying to appease, cajole, and persuade, and it's not an easy task. And he hasn't been overly successful in doing that in previous sessions. I would say here, I think starting with that thesis statement and maybe integrating it even more throughout idealistically brought some of those freshmen, new people to the legislature along with him and given them that sense of purpose. Maybe if you're so hardcore that you're posting, frankly, weird conspiracy theories about Michelle Obama's pregnancy, which is a real thing that a freshman legislator did.
Matthew Heilman from District 7 north of Bismarck.
I think that might be a lost cause, but for someone who's coming into the legislature who comes in with maybe a more of an open mind, but doesn't think they're going to be supporting Governor Burgum, maybe that could have been what was used to string that along.
I agree with you. I think as a writer, sometimes you'll find that where it's like you're closing paragraphs like, no, this should be the lead. You're supposed to move that up to the top. That happens a lot. That's a very common thing where, having worked your way through the body of what you want to say, you find out that you say it best at the end of what you wrote, and you should, once you get in a draft form, move that up to the top. I thought his speech was really well. I think it was too long. Burgum, he sometimes likes to indulge himself a little bit with these speeches, and that's a bad habit. But overall, this to me sounded like a governor who is probably more comfortable with this job and more comfortable with his relationship in the legislature than he's been in a long time. And if you think about it, increasingly a lot of the sort of I don't know, the people who were there for a long time. I don't know what you want to call them. The sticks in the mud, the people who were kind of standoffish to Burgum. A lot of them are gone now. And I'm thinking like Al Carlson, representative from Fargo, who was the majority leader in the House at the time Burgum first took office. He left in a previous election. Jeff Delzer, who is sort of his nemesis, longtime, very powerful chairman of the Appropriations Committee. He's there no more. There's a lot of new faces there. I think Governor Burgum's relationship, while never what I would describe as easy, I think is going to be improved this session. Maybe this is me being Pollyannish or too optimistic. I think he's going to have a better relationship with the legislature this session than maybe in years past.
I've been waiting for a long time. I found it jarring for someone who came out the gate so strong and so confident, running against a popular attorney general who had been sitting for 20 years, and Wayne Stenton, who was considered to be the odds-on favorite to be governor, running in a, not at the time, now more typical, but at the time, pretty bruising primary, where he more than implied through multi-million-dollar television ads that his opponents support Obamacare, that somewhat implied the state had a deficit. He seemed to be, he didn't have a lot of hesitation or nuance in taking the nomination, taking the mantle, and driving his way to the governorship. But then when he got there seemed to be a timidity towards what were part-time legislators that I found to not be the same tack that he was coming in. And here he sounded more confident, and he sounded more like he was laying the marker down for where he wanted people to go. Whether that works better or not, it will remain to be seen. But frankly, he wasn't getting the results he wanted before, so I can't imagine it wouldn't be better.
I think the problem, the whiplash, a lot of it has to do with the fact that Governor Burgum's approach to campaigning is so completely unnuanced, right? I mean, you look at what he did during the primaries earlier this year, where he got involved through his independent spending group and just carpet bombed people with flyers, right? That's
every year that he's been
right.
Governor,
He's done that every year. That's a very consultant driven, poll tested, mercenary approach. I have always felt that if Doug Burgum would go out on, I think instead of carpet bombing those legislative districts where he was trying to, to defeat certain people or to put certain people over the top, I think that if he had showed up there in person and knocked on some doors and held some events there and got up on the stump there, I think that would have done so much more than flyers, which are impersonal, which after a certain point begin to seem almost insulting. But that's always been his approach, where he just tries to overwhelm people with political advertising. I think the actual Doug Burgum, who shows up and talks with people and looks them in the face and shakes, I think he's so much more interesting. I think he's so much more compelling. And I think so many more people would like him if he, and not to say that he's not very popular. I mean, this guy, if he runs for another term, he's going to win with well over 60% of the vote again. There's no question in my mind about it. I just think that if he were willing to show a little more of himself in that way to the general public, I think some of these problems, this rockiness he's had with the legislature and elsewhere, I think some of it would evaporate. But overall, again, in one key area where I was looking was the way he talked about there's a competing tax plan. He very much wants this income tax plan. He thinks it's part of workforce, and I think he's right. He thinks he's part of workforce retention. If we can basically eliminate the income tax for most North Dakotans, put ourselves on a trajectory to get rid of it overall. I think he feels it's a centerpiece of his agenda going into this legislative session. But there's a competing plan to use the legacy fund to buy down property taxes. And he had some, I wrote about it this week, he had some tough words for it. Basically saying, listen, this hasn't worked. All this has done is grown spending. It's grown government. I don't want to do it anymore. Didn't use the word veto, but that sure sounded like, I'll veto this plan. And he's saying, I want my plan to be one of the first things you put on my desk. He said it in a very assertive way. And I think he's going to have a lot of success with that. I mean, we'll see. But to me, that all spoke to a confidence that was lacking in the past.
I agree that he's taking a principled off-ramping that is a clean break from his two Republican predecessors when it comes to how they handle property taxes and how they do buy downs that have been accused of being, I think fairly accurately so, robbing Peter to pay Paul. What those supporting those efforts will say, and the area where I think he may stumble is he is now started to say as a narrative, which I think would play well to voters on paper, on nuance, this is a way to grow government. I don't think hardly anyone voting for these things is voting for them saying, haha, and now I'll make the school board even bigger. What they're saying is, I have a constituent in my district who is 85 years old, that is physically able, is able to take care of their home. They have paid off their house. They are retired. And now we are going to give them a North Dakota mortgage, aka property taxes, that's going to tax them out of their house. They and their adult children are complaining to me about this for good reason. And I want to do something, anything about it. And if I come back to him and say, well, Doug Burgum's going to make it so that you don't have to pay income taxes here, guess what that's going to do for them? Absolutely nothing.
They don't have income anymore, but
absolutely nothing. It comes off as government doing nothing. I understand. I'm saying he's got to watch that.
Okay, but here's off
as uncaring to the person who's on the receiving end of that property tax bill, saying, I don't have anything to do with this. You have to build that narrative in such a way
but what he's
that
saying,
isn't finger pointing at the local governments or those people on the receiving end of those bills.
This is what he said during the State of the State, though. I think this is brilliant, because what he's saying is, listen, I want to have a conversation about concerns about property taxes, but we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again, because we've been doing buy downs and they're not fixing the problem for that person on a fixed income who's facing a North Dakota mortgage, as you put it, where they still got to pay $5,000 a year on their property. Mm-hmm. And if they don't pay it, then, they don't pay it long enough. Eventually, the government comes and takes their property away. This is what he said. I quote, "We understand and share the concerns about property taxes, and we're happy to sit down with anyone and discuss ways to actually reduce property taxes, not subsidize them with state spending that only encourages local spending and grows local government." And I think what he's got in favor, what's running in his favor when he makes that argument, is the fact that we've done this all before. We have done one buy down after another, and who's still complaining about property taxes? The person you just mentioned, Ben, who's got a person on fixed income, a loved one, a friend who's on fixed income, who can't pay the property tax. If we just keep doing the same thing, why do we think it's going to solve that problem?
And it's almost certainly not. Unfortunately, assessments are probably going to have to be the thing that get talked about there too. And I want to stick up and give voice to the hypothetical but very real school board member or other local government member who says, oh, I'm the taxing entity. You told me I need to fund X amount of dollars because you're providing this amount of state funding per student. I'm trying to inherit and deal with the great problem of basically having a whole new elementary school worth of children to educate every single year, West Fargo Public School District. And the only way I can do it is by raising these property taxes. Sure. And you say I can't touch any more state funds to do it. So what am I supposed to do? I'm not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go out and do it. The problem is when you say, well, this is all just growing government, for them and for that local taxing entity, it comes off as, it doesn't come off as, it's, hey, that's very cute for you to say. You get to be the principled hero and I get to be the bad guy leveraging the bill. But at the end of the day, someone has to.
It's been a blame game from the beginning. I mean, there's a lot of people in local government who like to spend money, and then when the property taxes go up, they blame the state. And it's always the state's problem for property taxes. If you're upset about your property taxes, then you need to go to that West Fargo school board member and have them explain to you, listen, we need these new schools. We need to do these things. This is why your tax bill. And if there's some things we need to do to free up some state funds or to create some flexibility, I think the governor's open to having that debate. And maybe he needs to be more explicit about saying that as he makes his case for income. Okay.
Yeah. I would say everything you're saying is absolutely valid. I would say that a school board member is a part-time government official that's got a full life, a spouse, 2.5 kids, a lawn to mow, and a mortgage to pay. Doug Burgum's got all those things too, but at the end of the day, it's the governor's responsibility to get out in front of that, even if it's not something that he's directly funding or doing.
All right. Well, but we cannot not ignore the lobbyists for the North Dakota Association of Counties and the North Dakota League of Cities and the school boards and everybody else who has been happy to dump the property tax problem on the legislature over and over again. Anyway, on that note, I think we were going to talk about this Good Life thing, only bringing 9 people into the state.
Let's do gambling.
What do we have
Unless
time?
you- sorry,
I didn't know if we know how to
you
wrap
reckon?
up, Ben. We're at 11.
I got 5 minutes.
You got 5 minutes?
Let's hit up gambling. Yeah.
Let's hit up gambling. All right, I had a big column today, and this is really interesting. I think people know. You know, we approved electronic pull tabs in North Dakota, and I got to tell you, Ben, when I think of charitable gaming, I think of some sports raffles. I think of a couple of sleepy, blackjack tables over in the corner of the local bar. I don't think of it as a $1.7 billion industry in our state. And yet
billion
that's
with a B, right? And exclusively in North Dakota, not nationally. Billion with a B in North Dakota.
1.7 billion in North Dakota. That's just charitable gaming. That does not include tribal gaming. That's a separate pot of money. That's just charitable gaming, $1.7 billion. That number has grown 560% since 2018. And Ben, in my column, there's a lot of things going on. I mean, I think one story is that I don't think our state is prepared or was prepared for that growth. I talked to the gaming division in the Attorney General's office, and they're telling me they have 2 gaming inspectors who go out in the field to try to oversee over 4,400 ETAP devices at 1,000 sites across the state. And they're in charge of all that. I don't think we're prepared to oversee this. I think you're starting to see some things with the charities where, they're trying to. I mean, there are charities that are buying hockey clubs and organizations that serve the disabled that are buying bars and buying restaurants to protect their turf, to protect their gaming installation. So
making it professionalized in a way where there's sometimes patches of regulation that someone, especially the Attorney General, does not want to see happen. I'm going to take you a step back even further. You're saying that people know that electronic pull tabs got was it fully legalized or legalized for charitable gaming? I should know that because I've had discussions.
E-pull tabs are just for charitable gaming.
Okay, so describe to folks what e-pull tabs are, because for folks who participate, they might not know, and they don't know this has become this multi-billion-dollar industry in North Dakota.
If you want to see the growth, I mean, if you go to my article, the headline is "Gambling in North Dakota has become a cutthroat billion-dollar industry with little oversight." That's my headline. There's a graph where you could see the growth from the first year before we implemented electronic pull tabs to fiscal year 2022, which just ended back in June. The growth has been almost exponential. And you got to remember, that growth has been taking place during the pandemic. I mean, imagine what the growth would have been if we hadn't gone through the pandemic and shut down, so many of these businesses.
I never even thought about that.
Intermittently. I mean, the growth has been astronomical. And so what pull tabs are, traditionally what pull tabs are, there's like a jar of pull tabs. You go, you buy a certain number of pull tabs. I think each jar was required to have a certain amount of winners in it. They've essentially taken that concept and moved it into a machine. And so ostensibly you're playing, and each play is a pull tab, right? And then so your odds are based on the number of winning tabs that would be in a jar. And actually, like, I didn't know this, out of $100 that's gamed, that's put through a machine, $90 of it goes back to players in terms of winnings. And then the next biggest the next biggest recipient of money, by the way, are the gaming distributors, and then it goes to charitable purposes, and then some other the state has a tax on it and things like that. But that's essentially what it is. We've recreated that traditional bar of pull tabs that sits on the bar at your local watering hole, and they put it into a machine, except now a machine can have multiple quote unquote jars of pull tabs. So I mean, it becomes very abstract. And people keep telling me, there's important distinctions between this and a slot machine. And I'm watching people play these things, and I'm saying, boy, whatever distinctions may exist in terms of in terms of user experience, I don't know that there's a lot of difference.
But there, as far as regulation goes and approvals for them, there's extreme versions of that. And most charitable organizations that casually think, we'll do a quick little raffle here, we don't have to tell anybody about, they think they can just do it on their own, find out very quickly that you need approval, and you will have the shiny star of the Attorney General's office come down on you hard. One of the first things Drew Wrigley did when he was appointed Attorney General was come down on 3 charities for having raffles that he deemed to be outside the purview of what the law was. And you'll laugh at me, but I think considering the largesse of the industry now. And this were the non-partisan league days, we probably just wind up electing a commissioner towards this, or at the very least have a specifically appointed commission, or maybe some. I know there's some. Is there a full-time staffer in the Attorney General's office that oversees charitable gaming?
Deb McDaniel is the direct. I think her title is director of the gaming. There's a gaming division within the Attorney General's office, and her, so she's at the head of it. She's full time doing it, and then she has several FTEs under her. As a matter of fact, I even have the breakdown. I mentioned the two gaming inspectors who go out into the field. I'm paging through my notes here, and of course now I can't.
So at that point, we do have a designated government official overseeing these, but I'm wondering how much there's no way of measuring it, but how much does the public really know or understand this outside of if they read an article that you happen to write?
Right. Well, I mean, that's my point. I don't think, again, I was shocked when I learned how big it was. I follow this stuff all the time. I had and listen, I don't go to bars. I'm not a gambler, not judging people who do. It's just not my scene, not my preferred leisure activity. I was shocked. $1.7 billion I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, there's like youth golf groups that are getting millions of dollars per quarter now. And I mean, and again, good on them, right? They're not doing anything illegal. And my intent here, I'm assuming all of these groups, until proved otherwise, are doing good work, right? But what I'm saying is this has gotten very, very big, very, very quickly. And now you're starting to see some issues with some turf wars going on. You're starting to see some issues, questions about, are things being done ethically? Does the state have enough oversight over what's going on? I think these are pertinent questions. And I think the other larger question is, do we realize what we've done with this, right? Because
I wonder that, and yeah.
Like legalizing gambling in North Dakota. Like if you ask people, is gambling legal in North Dakota? And they'd probably say, well, just on the reservations. And there's a couple of blackjack tables at my local bar. I don't think they realize it's a $1.7 billion industry now.
I don't think there's that public realization of it. And the history of gaming legalization in North Dakota is very interesting. There's a long history of when Governor Art Link was in office. He was very adamantly opposed to the creation of the state lottery.
Yes.
And it was based on I believe it was in part based on his faith. And I believe it was also, he cited various studies that have been done from social work groups at the time. This is in the 70s. We're talking pre-ancient history here. We obviously have a state lottery now. But he cited places that had used casinos and charitable gaming as places where there was more need for there was like more social cases of gambling addiction or other financial ruin for families based on that. And he did not want that there. My problem, he did not want that in his state in any way, shape, or form. And it was at the time a popular stance that he campaigned on. He was explicit about it. He went to the church potluck or the campaign rally and said, vote for me if you do not want the state lottery. Now, did some people vote for him anyway because they happen to be Democrats and he's a Democrat, or happen to be farmers and they like that he was a farmer or something like that? Sure, of course they did. Just like any other election. But I think that history and that being there as a tradition in North Dakota, and now it's gone almost completely by the wayside.
I think it's one of those social issues where the views of the public have changed, even over the last 20 years. You don't even have to go back to the 70s. I think even over the last 20 years, they've changed very quickly. I think same-sex marriage is in that ballpark. I think marijuana is in that ballpark. I think gambling is in that ballpark. We just have a different attitude. Listen, just about everybody I know makes trips to places like Las Vegas or Deadwood or something to go do a little gambling, right? I mean, it's accepted now. It's not verboten. And I guess to me, and I'm a libertarian, if I would legalize gambling. If it was up to me, if somebody said, let's legalize gambling in North Dakota, I'd probably vote for that. I just think that we have to be intentional about it. And I think we're starting to let some things in through the back door without really being intentional and saying, listen, we are creating a gambling industry, a very large, very consequential gambling industry in our state. Do we understand what we're doing? Are we giving it the proper oversight? That's what I'm calling for.
And my queasiness is actually where it gets out of the for-profit arena, because when the state lottery is conducted by the state, and I saw in my very brief time in the legislature, there was a lot of excuses made or priority put on, well, we can fund that via something like the state lottery. We can fund that via, or how many social causes are supported via charitable gambling, and they'll say we don't have another revenue
So
source.
how do you unring the bell? I mean, how do you unring the bell? I mean, the minute if you said, "Listen, we don't want to do charitable gaming, or we want to pull back," let's just say let's just pull back on these e-tabs and go back to 2018 before the e-tabs go along. You look at it's 90% of charitable gaming now. So you're going to have hockey clubs. You're going to have, organizations that serve disabled people. You're going to have organizations that serve, education. I mean, they're going to say, they're going to take a bath, and they're going to say, we can't. You're going to decimate us.
Yeah, and I think there's a real distinction between like social causes that are like a hockey club is like, you don't need a hockey club to live. You want to have a hockey club to have fun. They should be allowed to.
Sure.
I think they should be allowed to raise their own money because they have people willing to do meat raffles or whatever to fund the local hockey league, and that's just fine. What I didn't like, my queasiness with it when I was at the legislature, and it's more of a broad principle, but it's a more foundational one, is I viewed it as being an excuse to put that there instead of guaranteeing any kind of a funding mechanism or sustainable funding to fill in your, frankly, sob story social cause there. And I viewed it as an unreliable source of funds because the lottery doesn't have an uptick that year. Then apparently we're not going to do this, blank program that helps affordable, after school or affordable housing or what have you. And you can say like, well, there's, different buckets of funding within the state for that. I don't like the principle of having gaming be something that holds up something that we deem as worth the government doing. If you're a libertarian, you're easing away from a lot of the things that the government does. But that's my queasiness with the reliance on it.
I mean, listen. I very much believe in we should decide what we want the government should do, and then we should all have a role in paying for it. Right.
That's my problem with too much gaming being emphasized as that with like a state lottery is like, well, we want it, but we're not going to really put in a thing to fund it. So we'll let somebody else do that.
Right. I have, and sometimes I have a problem where we're siloing all these different types of revenues. This gaming revenue can only be used for this. And I think we end up creating problems for ourselves. One last point about this. A big debate in the legislature is there's going to be bills. I'm hearing about them. I don't have a lot of specifics yet. But there's going to be bills talking about, and we already saw leading up to the legislative session, there's a dispute about where these e-tab machines can go. Can they go in gas stations? Can they go in convenience stores? Can they go in? There's already a debate about what the law currently allows. So there's going to be a debate in the legislature. And so ask yourself, do you want every gas station in the state to have a little casino, right? You're going to have somebody in there drinking a beer, playing e-tabs. Right? I mean, do you want every restaurant in the state to have these, or do we want them in particular places? I think this gets back to we need to understand what we're allowing and if we're comfortable with it. And I mean, let's be clear. You drive through Montana, every gas station in Montana has a little casino on it. Are you okay with that? It doesn't seem terrible to me, but
I'm an East Sider. I don't know things about Montana, so I actually didn't know that.
Okay, yeah, it's that's already happening over there. But I don't know. I mean, again, I think gambling is something we got to be intentional about it, and we got to understand what we're doing with it, and we got to be prepared for it. And if we can't
just use a little more public scrutiny.
We just can't keep letting it in through the back door. That's that's my point. All right, we're gonna wrap it up there, Ben. Thank you so much. Great interview with Tammy Miller, and we'll be back with more of Plain Talk next week. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.